Winning the war on the lakefront. Here we go. Let's talk about some of New Orleans' involvement in World War II. It's interesting because, of course, the Port of New Orleans was a big deal and lots of shipbuilding and general support activities for the war. But the lakefront becomes an important aspect of the war and the war effort. Let's talk about that today. Of course, I am Edward Brandley, your NOLA history guy. Edward at NOLAhistoryguy.com. NOLA history guy on all the social media. Just pop that in on a search and you'll be able to find me. So let's talk about winning the war on the lakefront. We'll start with a basic introduction of the New Orleans lakefront and where how it developed so that we got to the 1940s. We'll talk about Higgins Industries at West End, then the hospitals in near the New Basin Canal, the Coast Guard and the Coast Guard Station at Bayou St. John. Then we'll talk about Naval Air Base New Orleans. And then from there, we'll keep going east a little bit and we'll get past the Naval Air Station to the Consolidated Vultee plant. Then Louisiana Air National Guard at Shushan Airport and the Industrial Canal. So the New Orleans lakefront, here's a map from about 1941 to give you an idea of what the basically what the lakefront looked like at the time. This is actually a railroad map for some proposals and that kind of thing for changes and upgrades to the rail system, but it gives you a good idea or a good breakdown of how things looked at the time. So on the left, of course, is going to be the western side of Lake Pontchartrain, and you can see there, for example, in the top left corner, it's that's Southern Yacht Club, and then you've got the two military hospitals, Lagarde's the Army, and then the Naval Hospital. Uh, Lake Vista was the only developed subdivision at the time of World War II, so it hadn't really developed, but it was there. That's the catch with that. Then, of course, the Bayou. The what will become more of City Park is essentially undeveloped at this time. That big blank area kind of between Lake Vista, the Bayou, and then you see Naval Air Station, and that's and of course the London Avenue. Actually, it's between the Bayou and London Avenue Canal, which becomes the Lake Terrace subdivision, and below that City Park. But that's not quite there yet at this point. What we now know is the University of New Orleans main campus on the lakefront is listed there as the Naval Air Station. That was Naval Reserve Air Base New Orleans, later NAS New Orleans at the time. Then we've got Elysian Fields Avenue. You don't see the beach yet because the beach wasn't really a thing until 1940. Then you see what's called Camp Pontchartrain. So what is now the Lake Oaks subdivision was a bit of an army post at that point. It had a few different functions and basically just a basic army post. Then at the back of the what's now the back of the Lake Oak subdivision became the Consolidated Vultee Aircraft Plant. And that's that little rectangle there. Then we get Franklin Avenue, and you'll see there where it says cantonment area. Basically, the part of that area that butted up against Franklin wasn't really in use yet. The part that says cantonment area was actually the buildings and support for what was called Bomber Base, and we'll talk about that. And then that leads us to the airport in the top right corner. So we're going to go along and talk about all of these, as well as some of the activities on the industrial canal. So let's go back to the western side, or west end, if you will. And this is the new canal. Now, locals will say New Basin Canal, but the Coast Guard always calls it the new canal. So we kind of stuck with that. So here is this is a photo of the west end side, of the Lake Pontchartrain side of the new canal in 1926. And you can see what we now know of as the West Lakeshore subdivision is still just part of the lakefront. You can see those long fishing piers, and that's actually an older. That's actually you can't. It's hard to see, but that little building in the basically you've got that big wide area there of water, and you see those fishing piers going out to it. That's what's now Mount Carmel High School at the time. I'll have to find, I have a better picture of that somewhere I'll find for us at some point. But the idea was that, so this is the 1920s, and the Orleans Levee Board, of course, has the idea of let's drain this area and turn it into something. And you see the beginning of that here, that the actual lake shore there was at Adams Avenue, which then becomes Robert E. Lee Boulevard. And you see it's like basically the whole fishing camp vibe. But by 1926, you can see they're building that breakwater further at the bottom of the photo, and the idea is that that's gonna get built out and then drain everything inside that breakwater. So you build the dam, drain it out, reclaim the land, fill it in, and extend the lakeshore out a good bit from there. That's West End Boulevard. Okay, well, it's West End. Yeah, I guess it is a boulevard at this point. The streetcar ends back before here. The idea was you could take the West End train and then the West End streetcar up there to Adams Street, and then you walked up half a block, 2 blocks, and then you could cross over that bridge on the right hand side and go to the West End entertainment area. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about West End in detail as part of this series. So here's the result of that reclaimed land. Now remember, you're looking at basically all of that stuff that's on the left-hand side of the previous photo is nothing but water and marsh and swamp. Now it becomes reclaimed land all the way the heck up, all the way to the mouth of the new canal. What we're looking at here is a shot from 1942. You can see Lakeshore Drive, the WPA project to construct and pave Lakeshore Drive is complete. And then that's the LaGarde Army Hospital in the back on the left-hand side. And you can see already that the seafood places have evolved, have on the canal, has started popping up. I mean, let's face it, you got all those people working at these hospitals, and you had place for people to come out, and cars are much more prolific. You didn't just have to take the streetcar out here for a day trip any longer. So yeah, it starts getting to be popular all the way to today with the restaurants that we have out there. So this is a great example, or explains just in a very short amount of time the whole land reclamation projects that begin in the 1920s. Move over to the other side of the Orleans Parish lakefront. See that lighthouse in the top left corner? Does that look familiar to you? That's the Milneburg Lighthouse, or the Port Pontchartrain Lighthouse. That Milneburg, of course, was a port coming into New Orleans. The idea was that if you wanted to bypass coming up the river from the mouth of the river, you could come into the Gulf of Mexico, enter through Lake Bourne, come in through the Wrigley's Pass or the Chefman Tour Pass into Lake Pontchartrain, and so Port Pontchartrain opened up or became a port facility for cargo loading and unloading. Then that's where the Port Pontchartrain, that's why the Port Pontchartrain Lighthouse existed. So this goes back now to the late 1820s. And in 1831, that's when the Pontchartrain Railroad opens because they weren't going to build another canal. The railroad took care of that. So that was the connection from Port Pontchartrain back to the city. So here's again 1926. We see they're starting to build out the pilings and the outboard wall that will then drain that area so that we could have so that the land reclamation could take place out here on the eastern side of Lake Pontchartrain. Here's the finished product. Look in the back right of this photo, and you can see that little white tower. That's the Port Pontchartrain Lighthouse. And you can see this is from 1940-ish or so. The seawall is complete, and we see the Lakeshore Drive is completed, paved out, and basically ready for expansion and occupancy. If it wasn't for World War II, this whole area would have developed much quicker. That, of course, was the idea and the original mission and plan of the levee board. All right, so here's the stage is set now. This is 1940 coming into 1941, and we start seeing at this point some shifts towards a wartime front. We're going to go east, we're going to go west to east for this presentation. Here's Higgins Industries on the new canal. Prior to World War II, Andrew Jackson Higgins made boats. He made service boats for the oil and gas industry was the bread and butter of Higgins Industries. Higgins was originally a lumber guy, and he saw the virtues of boats and small craft built with cypress wood. That's what led to the pitch to make the landing craft, was that cypress wood was incredibly plentiful. Higgins's people knew how to make boats using this. The stuff was plentiful, it was cheap. You get the idea. So, what originally was the Higgins boat supply facility on the New Basin Canal, the war starts. Higgins pitches his landing craft to the War Department. Everybody buys in on it. This facility it's a little boat shop. It wasn't going to do the manufacturing needed, but what Higgins did with this facility was of course, you see the sign, they closed it down. They weren't selling parts or doing repairs on private boats, on civilian boats any longer. They basically closed this, and this became the main facility to train the coxswains for the landing craft and also to train the pilots, the operators of the PT boats. So this basically became a training and classroom facility for the men who were going to operate the boats built by Higgins. So here's a good overview shot of the hospitals. Now, this is 1943 or so. We see at the very bottom of the photo, that's going to be the western side. That's going to be West End. That's the western side of the New Basin Canal. And then, of course, you see the canal itself feeding into Lake Pontchartrain on the left-hand side of the photo. We go to the east bank or the eastern side of the canal, and there's an air that's an aerial shot now of you can see Lakeshore Drive being all paved out. In addition to Lakeshore Drive being paved out, you see the two-lane road that's running the length of the right-hand side of the photo. That's Robert E. Lee Boulevard, now Allen Toussaint Boulevard. You can see the Mount Carmel convent there, kind of the middle of the photo on the right-hand side. Remember those fishing piers before the land was reclaimed? Yeah, that's where the lakefront ran all the way up to there, and you could walk out of the convent and they could go out onto that pier. So here's the again the bigger side now, moving from the bottom of the photo up. You've got the canal and then Lakeshore Drive, and you've got grassy area there, and then Lagarde Army Hospital is the big facility. Then you see there's a row of trees that are fairly young growing out. That is the newly paved Canal Boulevard. Now, Canal Boulevard, of course, goes all the way up to City Park Avenue, takes a half block turn, and becomes Canal Street. So that's the kind of the divider between the Army Hospital at the bottom of the photo, and then in top left you see the Naval Hospital above the U.S. Navy Hospital, just above that. You see that little semicircle kind of looks like an amphitheater? That is actually a drive-in movie theater. And it actually was simply called, this baffled me for a long time because it was simply called the Drive-In. That was the name of the place. Let's go to the drive-in. Yeah, which one? No, the drive-in. And it, well, just like you see a little baseball diamond there with the Army Hospital, and you had all the stuff along Lakeshore Drive. Entertainment facilities were a big deal when you've got a lot of people out here. Going further up now, so we go past the Naval Hospital, you start seeing the curvy waterway as opposed to the straight waterway of the canal. That, of course, is Bayou St. John. And then above, no, take that back. That is the Orleans, that's the Marconi Canal. My bad. That's the Marconi Canal, and then or Orleans Avenue Canal. And then that's the beginning of Lake Vista. At the very beginning, you can see the roads are paved out with the cul-de-sacs for the Lake Vista subdivision. But by the 1940s, all of a sudden now there's really no available building materials for building out the subdivision. We're not at war yet, but the cards were, it's kind of like it was in the cards that it was just a matter of time before the United States would take a stand against Germany and Japan. Okay, so here's Lagarde Army Hospital. This is a reverse view of the previous photo. So the bottom of this picture is Canal Boulevard. You see all the trees that were planted there as part of the WPA projects of 1939 and 1940. Lagarde Hospital is built out a year later in 1941. You can see it becomes a really big deal. This is a shot from more like in the area of late 1942 to 1943, and you can see the whole thing has really expanded out a good bit. If you look toward the top right, you see the undeveloped land on the side of the hospital. And you go up further and you go to the new canal, and you can see the Higgins Industries building over there in the on the right hand side up by the new canal. So Lagarde General Hospital was one of 10 Army hospitals authorized in January of 1941. Remember, we're not at war yet. Okay, we're not, we are not formally at war until the Pearl Harbor attack. And so on December 8th, the day after, is when Roosevelt Roosevelt addresses Congress, and we declare war on Japan. So the hospital is authorized in January. It's built out in April of 1941. The purpose of LaGarde was to be a convalescent hospital, basically. This is 1941. Commercial air conditioning only happened on Canal Street 10 years earlier. You didn't have the electrical capacity to AC everything. So if you're going to build a hospital, let's do it up by the lake and catch the lake breeze. That's why people had been going out to West End since the 1840s, is to catch that, to get that escape from the heat of the city and that kind of thing. So LaGarde is built out because Army posts training is ramping up by 1939. Germany has the Blitzkrieg. By 1940, Germany has occupied France. The Battle of Britain is in full swing. The Americans are doing their part with things like the Lend-Lease program. So manufacturing and production of war materials is now a thing, even though we're not at war. What's also happening is the U.S. Army is building up in size. So that means more training. That means more training injuries. So these hospitals, LaGarde was one of the hospitals that was constructed to handle some of that overflow. It eventually grows in size to 1,650 beds. After the war, you've got this big hospital facility. It is after in 1946, we see the creation of the Veterans Administration, and of course, this was designed as a convalescent hospital. It was a good place for wounded veterans to come and complete their recovery. The LaGarde General remains here on the lakefront until 1952, when we see the big VA hospital complex built out downtown on Tulane Avenue. So LaGarde Army Hospital is there since 1941, but it picks up a new role after we joined the war. Now remember, it's prior to our entry in the war, the hospital was a convalescent hospital. When the war begins, the idea was, let's create a hospital, staff, equipment, everything that we can pack up and move to Europe when necessary. So in February of 1943, the war is progressing well underway in Europe, and it's a foregone conclusion from anyone, from just the privates of the Big Red One, all the way up to Bradley and Eisenhower. Even Rommel and Hitler know that at some point the Allies are going to invade Europe. So, as part of that preparation, the Allies know, well, we're going to need medical facilities. So, let's ramp up a hospital. Let's get the doctors, the nurses, the staff. Let's get everything together. And so, one of the hospital army units that is part of that project and that activity was the 182nd General Hospital. It's activated in February 1943. The personnel are moved to New Orleans. You've got this big hospital facility. It now becomes a full, not convalescent, but it becomes an Army hospital. So they move to New Orleans. The 182nd staff moves into LaGarde, takes over. They train, they get ready, and they're caring for patients on a daily basis, but they're also preparing for war. They're preparing to go to the UK to support the Allies. The unit packs up and leaves LaGarde Army Hospital in March of 1944. March, April, May, June. Not that much longer before the invasion, right? So the infrastructure, of course, all in that first 6 months or first 5 months really of 1944 is being built out in the UK. So this the 182nd packs up and heads to Camp Kilmer in New Jersey, at which point they board ships and they go over to UK. The permanent location of the 182nd was in Sudbury, which is a town in Derbyshire in England. The training, of course, at the 182nd, doctors and nurses are wearing helmets, medical personnel. Remember uh, Patton telling a doctor to that he needs to wear his helmet in an army field hospital in the movie and that kind of thing. So now we see basically doctors and nurses and orderlies doing gas mask training and that kind of thing because they're well aware that they're going to pack up and have to move over to England. In addition to that, well, we sort of had the ability to do landing craft training on the lakefront because Higgins was building all of those LCVPs. So those doctors and nurses and orderlies all learned how to load up landing craft vehicle personnel so that they could, if necessary, deploy from England to France. Now, that was never necessary for the 182nd, but they were certainly trained up on what they'd have to do. After World War II, victory, everything starts settling down. Lagarde continues. The VA puts pumps a good bit of money into Lagarde to make more permanent buildings. Remember, it's an army hospital. It's more of the wooden barrack style that you see of that smaller building on the right-hand side of the photo. But now we're seeing brick and mortar buildings come up on the lakefront because now this is the Veterans Administration, and we're going to have soldiers and sailors coming as part of the VA benefits to have to get their medical care. And so the VA hospital stays out here until the mid 1950s when the bigger facility is moved into town. And then, of course, after Katrina, that's demolished and built into an even larger facility that now fronts Canal Street in Mid City. Shifting gears a little bit here, let's talk about Naval Hospital New Orleans. So Naval Hospital New Orleans is a good bit smaller than Lagarde Army Hospital. You can see that this is basically from left to right again. This is Lakeshore Drive running to Robert E. Lee Boulevard with the Marconi, the Orleans Canal there on above it, and the Lake Vista, the undeveloped Lake Vista subdivision above that. So the Naval Hospital is maybe just a little bit bigger than half the size of Lagarde. So it wasn't that much. It was again designed to be a convalescent hospital. You can see a little more detail on the drive-in movie theater there as well. So Naval Hospital New Orleans is activated in 1941. The Navy, the War Department is figuring, well, shoot, we're gonna build out an overflow hospital for the Army. It's a good location. We don't, deal with a lack of air conditioning better than in a lot of places. So let's go ahead and let's build a naval hospital. Again, initially it's designed to be a recovery convalescent overflow hospital. But when the war breaks out, now we're dealing with, in particular with the Navy, we're dealing with the Pacific War and the island hopping, Pearl Harbor, out into the Pacific, eventually all the way to the Japanese home islands. And to do that, the Navy is literally having to build bases all the way from Pearl Harbor to Guam to Saipan to Okinawa as things grow out. Now, these naval bases, the full-on naval bases that serviced and repaired ships were called Lions, and then there were smaller frontline bases that were called Cubs. The air bases were called Oaks, like strong oak trees, and the smaller air bases were called acorns. Oak, lion, and cub, oak and acorn. You get the idea. So that what happens is the Naval Hospital New Orleans becomes a facility that ramps up naval hospitals at the small frontline air bases that were being deployed out into the Pacific. So the Naval Hospital New Orleans becomes it's the same concept as the 182nd on the Army side, where you ramped up a hospital, doctors, nurses, orderlies, uh, hospital corpsmen for the Navy. You ramp it all up here, pack it all up, send them to the West Coast, put them on ships, take them to an Air Corps Naval Air Base, and then they became the hospital for that. And that ramped up at least twice over time. It was completely closed after the war because the VA had set up at the Army hospital. So there was really no further need for this. The Navy packed up Naval Hospital New Orleans and brought it down to the Naval Support Activity New Orleans, which was, everybody of an age will remember, the Algiers Naval facility right there on the river. That was Naval Support Activity New Orleans for years. It's now been, of course, demilitarized, and it's a mixed use complex for commercial development. The Lagarde Hospital becomes the East Lake. Oh, ooh, that's an error. The Lagarde Army Hospital, of course, becomes the West Lakeshore subdivision. Then there's Canal Boulevard, and the Naval Hospital becomes the East Lakeshore subdivision. So we've got a lot of soldiers and sailors all over the lakefront now. Naturally, City Park is not that far away, so why not have a couple of sailors with their wave dates go do some? Gotta love it. The women are doing the rowing in on a boat in the old Bayou Metairie, now City Park Lagoon. This was all relatively new, as a lot of the city park development that makes the lagoon and puts the boathouse out there, that kind of thing, is WPA stuff from 1939, 1940. So go out and have a lovely day on your day off. So moving over a little bit, we saw the two military hospitals. Then that's the Orleans Canal, the Lake Vista subdivision, where you can see the cul-de-sac streets that just aren't built out yet. Gorgeous mid-city modern stuff when it finally does get built out. Mid-century modern stuff when it finally gets built out. Then we come to Bayou St. John, and of course Bayou St. John goes all the way back to Bienville in terms of importance for the city of New Orleans. So by now, of course, we've had Fort St. John going back to the Spanish colonial days, and then, of course, the Bayou St. John Entertainment District. By now, the Coast Guard figures that right here at Bayou St. John is a good place to build out our Coast Guard station for New Orleans. The U.S. Coast Guard ramped up a good bit with the war effort. In particular, Coast Guard guardsmen provided security at the various Higgins sites. They, of course, fulfilled the main Coast Guard, one of the main Coast Guard missions of search and rescue assistance. They also staffed the lighthouse, the New Canal Lighthouse, over back at the mouth of the New Canal over at West End. So you can see Bayou St. John as the WPA are developing everything out. And we see that the finished product is a full on, you can see the finished product on the right hand side, full on development of Lakeshore Drive going back into the various neighborhoods. So here's an aerial shot of the of Lakeshore Drive and the Bayou St. John, the original Bayou St. John bridge. The Coast Guard station is in the middle of the slide on the western side of the mouth of the bayou. You kind of see a horseshoe curved a road there for access, and then a multi-story wooden building. That's where the Coast Guard station was. This is also later becomes shelter number three in the big swimming area on Lakeshore Drive. Now that building holds up for a long time. For a long time, I was always under the impression that that building got blown down by a hurricane or got severely damaged. And folks that were in the Coast Guard would had corrected me when I, especially after I did this presentation at the World War II Museum. They're like, "No, man, that building held up with everything. It just fell apart because it was a wooden building. There was no steel frame or anything else. It was, total war effort. Build it up for all of the various missions that were going on. This is the first. This is the if you, again, if you remember these times, this was the first bridge across Bayou St. John at the lakefront. To cross the bayou, you had to go further in at this point. At earlier times, you have to go all the way to Esplanade Avenue. But here, this one was built out. This is a really big bridge to avoid having to build a drawbridge, so that those piers that you see there are pretty high. So a lot of small craft could very easily come through there. As a matter of fact, all of the LCVPs that were brought into the lake, they brought into the lake for testing and everything, cleared that with no problem at all. That empty piece of land on the left-hand side later becomes the Lake Terrace subdivision and developed out. It's nothing right now in this photo because it's the original location of Pontchartrain Beach. Now, Harry Batt opens up Pontchartrain Beach in 1929 on this location on the eastern side of Bayou St. John. When the WPA makes their plans to build out and develop Milneburg at Elysian Fields and the lake, they plan to build a big bathhouse, for a changing facility, so that you could go out and then build out a big sand beach in front of it. Bat bids on maintaining that public bathhouse and all of that development. Naturally, he packs up Pontchartrain Beach, and that's when it moves to that's when the amusement park moves to Elysian Fields and the lake. That's 1940. You can see there's not much going on in the Lake Vista subdivision. You've got Lakeshore Drive there, and then the next, you see the subdivision, and then that next divided roadway, of course, is Robert E. Lee Boulevard, which ends there at the end of basically it ends at Bayou St. John. The that section that's a lot of trees and foliage there on the western side of the bayou, that's old Fort St. John, Spanish fort. The recreational facility and complex was basically further up on the lakefront. What was the Coast Guard's mission? Well, the primary mission of the Coast Guard, of course, search and rescue, coastal protection, coastal patrolling. And when Higgins Industries starts going big time, the Coast Guard provides military armed security for Higgins Industries. And to guard against both sabotage and espionage as well. The photo on the right is a cover of a stockholders report from 1945 showing all of the big Higgins facilities. So Higgins Industries, the big Higgins started, well, of course, Higgins had his boat shop and his boat repair out on West End, and then he had a facility for construction further uptown off of St. Charles Avenue. When Higgins pitches the War Department to start building boats for the war effort, that facility just wasn't going to cut it. So Higgins moves and acquires the land that is now Delgado Junior College, Delgado Community College on City Park Avenue by the Marconi Canal, by the basically by the Orleans Canal there, just before you get to City Park. Now that area had extensive streetcar and railroad connections, so it didn't take much for Higgins to build out his big factory to make these boats and then run rail lines directly to the bayou. So where Delgado is now was this big manufacturing facility. They built the LCVPs and the PT boats here. The They build the LCVPs and the PT boats at this location, put them on rail cars and pull them over to the bayou, drop them into the bayou. And you can see now this is late 1943, early 1944. This is peak production for the LCVPs. These things were then put on ships and brought across to the UK, where all of this was then staged to go across the English Channel and invade France. Now we've come up to the London Avenue Canal. We are now past the we're past Lake Vista on oh actually we're past Lake Terrace, excuse me, on the other side. So that empty area that you saw on Bayou St. John leading over to the London Avenue outfall canal would become the originally it was Pontchartrain Beach, then it becomes the Lake Terrace subdivision. We get to the London Avenue Canal. You can see Lakeshore Drive. Dead Man's Curve's still there. That they straightened that out completely because of car wrecks later on, and this becomes Naval. Actually, it starts out the official name was NRAB, Naval Reserve Air Base New Orleans. Later, Naval Air Station NAS New Orleans, and you can see that is what you now know as, or originally was LSUNO, and now the main campus of the University of New Orleans. You can see right behind it, you've got the sand beach that is Pontchartrain Beach. It's only been open for a couple of years at this point, but becomes a popular amusement venue for everybody involved in the war effort to come in and let off some steam. It's hard to see here, but in the middle of the photo, you can see a smokestack, the one remaining building from NAS New Orleans, which is now the Homer Hitt Alumni Center. And then, of course, you've got the taxiways, and to the right-hand side is the main runway of the air station. So Naval Air Station, New Orleans, the land gets there from these various land reclamation projects. You saw the Milneberg Lighthouse in the beginning of the presentation. All of that area gets drained. The WPA, the Works Progress Administration, comes in, and one of the big things here is to provide labor jobs in various locations. So this is basically, in context, this is how Gentilly gets paved roads, fire stations, new schools, and the bathhouse that becomes the foundation, the first building of the Pontchartrain Beach amusement park. So that area is kind of getting leveled out and developed. The It's clear that the Navy has an interest in this area, so the WPA, starts preparing that area, and then at that point, the Navy takes that particular facility and goes from there. It's activated as a Navy base in 1941. Its original mission, of course, well, always until after the war, was as a training facility. The War Department, the Navy Department, uh, basic flight training, of course, to this day is at NAS Pensacola over in Florida. But they're looking at this going, we're going to need more facilities. We're going to need more space. So that was the original concept. The base operated from 1941 to 1957 when NAS New Orleans moved to Alvin Callender Airfield in Belle Chase, across the river and down the river away. This is now, or once the Navy abandons the base, it reverts back to the property reverts to the state. The Orleans Levee Board then develops it as what becomes Louisiana State University in New Orleans, now the University of New Orleans main campus. Here's a shot from the from the main runway, from the main runway to the taxiway back to all of the operations buildings for NAS New Orleans. You see that smokestack on the left? By the time my daddy got to LSUNO in 1960, those barracks buildings there, or those wooden buildings, plus the incinerator that was the reason for the smokestack, were really about all that was there at that time. That, of course, all gets torn down and developed into proper university buildings, but the smokestack to this day is still there. It's not an incinerator anymore. They built the Homer Hitt Welcoming Center, named in honor of Chancellor Homer Hitt, the first chancellor of LSUNO. Here's construction of the taxiway and the taxiway and runways. You can see putting down asphalt, spreading it out, making roadways, or in this case, making airways. Here's a little more detail of what spreading asphalt and making roads was like in 1941. So NAS New Orleans, the original program that was NRAB New Orleans, was to train what were called V5 aviation cadets. And you can see this is the first graduation class. The overexposure here of the photo, man, they kind of look like milkmen here, but these are these are aviation cadets from the V5 training program. The idea was to, before sending these young men to Pensacola for basic flight training, the V5 program was designed to sign them up, get them enlisted. So they're sailors here. They're seamen second class at this point, and they go through 30 days of school to learn some basics about anything from how to act in the Navy all the way up to some basic book learning that one would need to be a naval aviator. They graduate the course, they get on a bus, they go over to Pensacola, and they become the naval aviators and heroes of World War II. Here's another aerial shot. You can see that 2-4. You can see that's the approach for the runway for NAS New Orleans, and you can see the WPA build out of the what becomes the Pontchartrain Beach amusement park. So this is 1942, 1943-ish. You see you've got the top eastern corner, the northeastern corner of the naval base with the approach of the runway. Look how close that final approach is to Elysian Fields. Just whew, kind of just thinking about that is an interesting concept. The traffic circle's still there. That piece of Lakeshore Drive is still there. That was a gas station at the traffic. Well, first off, it was a no, I believe it always was a gas station right there. You got the bottom right corner of the traffic circle. Later becomes the that later becomes the well, it's a gas station. Then it's acquired by the Orleans Levee Board to become their police headquarters. And boy, has that grown out since I was a, a, radio dispatcher in the summer of 1980 for the OLB police. Above it, you can see the parking for the relatively new uh, Pontchartrain Beach Amusement Park. You can see the midway that at the top there, the gay midway that would basically see stadium lights there, and then the white sandy beach that's going all the way up into the lake at that point. The two big buildings, if you look at the traffic circle and follow just above the traffic circle, that's the men's and ladies bathhouses. And then there was a bridge that you could cross over the midway and go straight into the sandy beach area. So you change in the bathhouse and go out for a swim or spend a day on the beach, blow off some steam, that kind of thing. Below the beach on the right hand side, you can see you've got an undeveloped area, and then you start seeing some housing. That's that Camp Pontchartrain. That is barracks housing and um, uh, enlisted quarters for the Naval Air Station. Officers' quarters were just south of Leon C. Simon Boulevard, on off out of frame below the Navy the NAS on the left hand side of this photo. Fast forward now, it's the end of the war. The you can see NAS New Orleans now at its peak, where it's completely built out. You see all of those. You can barely see the smokestack for all of the development here. This is the facility at its peak. There was nothing wrong with it except for one minor detail, is that the neighborhood had grown around it, and by 1947 the United States Navy was very much into jets. That meant that it was necessary to have longer runways than that runway that butts right up against Elysian Fields Avenue. There was really no tearing down anything at that point and expanding this facility, not to mention the fact that folks in the what become the levee board subdivisions were not terribly keen on the idea of jet takeoffs day and night. So it was logical to move the naval facility down to a more undeveloped area. There was an airfield down in Belle Chase, Louisiana, that was called Alvin Callender Field. The Navy takes that over and turns that into the modern NAS New Orleans, which is now referred to as Joint Reserve Base New Orleans, because that facility has Marine Corps, Air Force, and naval aviation units that staff it. The Navy moves out in 19 by 1957. The Navy is gone. They abandon this facility. The Orleans Levee Board takes it back over and immediately goes to work with a master plan to develop the campus. This is LSUNO in the late 1960s. If you look toward you see Lakeshore Drive at the bottom, you see the lake and Lakeshore Drive, then the green space that is where the levee's nothing at this. Actually, this is early. This is yeah, this is late. Yeah, this is mid 1960s. Uh, the levee hasn't been completely built out here yet. post Betsy, but of course it really, becomes a point where it's hard to see into the campus later on. You can start seeing you've got the liberal arts building, the education building, the science and engineering buildings. Now I take that back. This is more like 1970. Looking at the buildings, never really gave this a lot of thought just yet. But this is, you can see the University Center. This is a good bit further along, but it's still because the photo was in a collection of LSUNO photos. So that means it's earlier than 1974. At the beach, at the beach, at the Pontchartrain Beach. You'll have fun. You'll have fun every day of the week. Sorry, had to sing it. It's the jingle. Was on the radio, on TV, everywhere. Let me back up a little bit. Here is the gay midway. When the beach opens up, it's designed to be a beach. Harry Bat moves the amusement park from Bayou St. John over here. You can see that Jack sign. That's the big Coney Island hot dog, streamlined modern concessions, and the game facilities there. The big lights are to light up the midway and the beach so you could go out at sunset and then, of course, walk the midway at night and spend your money on hot dogs, beer, and arcade games and stuff that you'd see on a fair midway. Here's a view now from the beach itself, looking into the lake. It really was a white sand beach, and it was quite popular as a result. Advertising from 1939, so you can see the beach is opening up. The WPA projects have completed, and the entire beach officially opens on June 4th, 1939, including the big attraction, which was the Zephyr roller coaster. And you can see the humps of the Zephyr looking back. That's a surveyor looking out for checking for doing measurements on the seawall maintenance, on the Lakeshore Drive improvements, and then you can see the extent of Pontchartrain Beach going back. One of the more sad and disappointing aspects of this time period was Jim Crow. Uh, because the WPA was a federal agency and they built the bathhouse that becomes the impetus for Bat moving his amusement park to Elysian Fields and the Lakefront. Well, the WPA built the bathhouse, so they were required to build a separate but equal facility for Black New Orleanians, and they did so further east on Hain Boulevard on Lake Pontchartrain. Lakeshore Drive ends at the Industrial Canal, and it becomes Hain Boulevard on the other side. You go further down Hain, and Lincoln Beach was developed as a bathhouse and beach swimming area for black folks in the area. Lincoln Beach, in some ways, I don't want to say that Lincoln Beach had the last laugh, but when you start looking at the musical acts that went out to Lincoln Beach, we're talking, this is, 1950s, early 1960s black musical acts that would, Elvis may have played the beach and Pat Boone may have played the beach, but all of the black folks, all of the black cats played Lincoln Beach to play for the black folks that were out there for a night or a day trip out to the lakefront. Lincoln Beach closes in 1964 with the passage of the Civil Rights Act of that year. Johnson signs the Civil Rights Act. There's Jim Crow comes to an end. Theoretically, there's no more segregation. We'll talk about We'll talk about segregation in Pontchartrain, or more specifically, integration in Pontchartrain Beach when we talk about some Pontchartrain Beach history. But then basically, Lincoln Beach falls into disrepair. There are now serious efforts to revive Lincoln Beach, both as representative of Black culture in New Orleans and because it's not a bad location and not a bad place to set up again. Moving now Pontchartrain Beach and past Pontchartrain Beach and past the uh what now is the Lake Oaks subdivision there. And you see the what we see there is that the old Camp Pontchartrain with all of those barracks and the stuff that was just to the east of Pontchartrain Beach has now been demolished and that's been cleared. And you can see it's all empty land now, but that becomes the Lake Oaks subdivision. Then you get to Franklin Avenue. And at Franklin Avenue, what was built out there is an aircraft plant, and that's why it's long and skinny. The company that built the facility is called or was called Consolidated Vultee. And the idea was they planned to build seaplanes here. And it's a Ford style assembly line. You know how you start with the chassis at one end, it's a chassis fabricated someplace else at a steel fabricating plant, that kind of thing. Turns out that the hulls for the seaplanes were actually built over in Covington at another Consolidated Vultee plant. Then they were put on boats and brought over here. And so on the left-hand side there, you'd start with the hull of the seaplane, you'd put it on a conveyor, and you would just the conveyor would just move it from stop to stop to stop till it got to the end there on the right-hand side as a completed plane. They'd push that seaplane out into the lake, start the engine, take it off, and then land back over at NAS New Orleans. Couple of interesting notes on this photo. The that group of buildings that you see just in the foreground in front of the Consolidated Vultee aircraft plant is actually a prison stockade. It's a prison stockade for German officers who were POWs. And what happened was the Army, as the Army and the Army Air Force, or the Army Air Corps, originally captured German engineers, identified them as being aeronautical engineers or mechanical engineers that were part of their aircraft construction programs. They brought those officers specifically here to New Orleans and uh, basically they built that as a stockade that was a POW barracks, and those guys would live in those buildings and then walk across. They had given their parole, and they were now basically trusted. Kept an eye on them, of course, but then they went to work at Consolidated Vultee, lending consulting to the engineers and draftsmen that worked at the plant. So those German engineers actually worked to improve the designs of the seaplanes that would later go out into the Pacific to fight the Japanese. After I did this presentation the very first time, I got emails and people coming to me with stories about talking about how they ran into these guys because they would take the Bomber Base bus line from Franklin Avenue down to the basically into town to the Gentilly streetcar and then back into town, and they were going to the movies or they were hanging out on Royal Street, that kind of thing, because yeah, close to the end of the war, they had nothing to go back to. They were kind of ready to become Americans and move in at that point. Just some incredible, just incredible oral history stuff we picked up over time for that kind of thing. So the consolidated Vultee plant. So you had the Navy base on the western side of Elysian Fields, that original Army barracks complex in what's now Lake Oaks, and then right behind it is the consolidated Vultee manufacturing plant. This facility built the PBY Catalina flying boats. Did you ever see the movie Midway? And they show all the PBYs going out searching, looking for the Japanese carrier fleet. Those are PBYs. Those original PBYs were built in San Diego, but of course, as the war ramps up, there was a need for more of those. So the Consolidated Vultee opens this factory in 1943 to boost its war effort. 235 PBY Catalinas were built here in New Orleans. After the war, well, we really didn't need military seaplanes at that level because these things were built tough. They were built to get shot at. There wasn't a need to expand that. So the plant closes. The Consolidated Vultee contract is canceled. The company kind of moves back to San Diego, which was their home base. Now, Consolidated keeps going. They build aircraft and everything else, just no longer here in New Orleans. By 1948, this is a big manufacturing and assembly plant. It's sold to the American Standard Plumbing Company, and it becomes a manufacturing plant for toilets and sinks and that kind of thing. Uh, it unfortunately burned down in the 1980s. The space is now used as a field yard support facility for the Orleans Levee Board, so it's still very much in use. Here's what a Catalina looked like. This is a PBY. I guess I could pull that tail number and see if it was actually built in New Orleans, but it certainly is a good shot of what the aircraft looked like. Some stories relating to the Consolidated Vultee plant. This one, basically, I was doing some stuff on this, and I had asked Winston Ho, who now works for the Historic New Orleans Collection and is an expert on Chinese history in New Orleans. And when he hears I'm doing stuff on the Consolidated plant, he says, "You've got to write about Edward Choi." Turns out Edward M.Y. Choi was a native of Shantou or Sanju in Guangdong province in China. The war hits China. He gets trapped in the U.S. after Pearl Harbor. There's no going home now because the Japanese have not only occupied China, but they're at war with us, and it's not exactly like he's going to be able to repatriate. So he starts taking draftsman and architect, basically draftsman jobs. He was trained as an architect, but like a lot of immigrant stories that we hear, you got to start out lower because you don't have American credentials and that kind of thing. So the Consolidated Vultee plant opens up in 1943. He goes to work there as a draftsman and an engineer. His architectural skills come forward as part of that gig, and he becomes a full-blown commercial architect after the war. He designs numerous buildings, not the least of which is a common plan that was bought by John Schwegman to build out his Schwegman's Giant supermarkets. And so that's Choi. It's a grainy picture, but that's Choi on the left standing next to John Schwegman with other folks at the opening of a Schwegman Brothers Giant supermarket that was designed by architect Choi. Here is an architectural drawing from Edward Choi, who now is a licensed certified architect. This is 1964, and this is the Schwegman store that's at Broad and at North Broad and Bienville streets. And you can see this is an architectural elevation to show you this is what the store was going to look like when we get it completed. It was indeed completed in the fall of 1964. You can see gas station pumps in the front. Schwegman invented Walmart before Walmart was cool. Look at the stuff that that store had: drugstore, shoe repair store, barber shop, bakery, which was a Mackenzie's, jewelry department, bar and sandwich. Bar in a grocery store? Yeah. Dad could go to the bar, have lunch, have some raw oysters, have a beer or two or three, or if you're not hungry, just have a cocktail. Well, mom is making groceries. Dry cleaning, office space for rent above the grocery store retail floor, and the gas station. Sound like a Costco to you? Yeah, Schwegman was that guy. He's a genius, or was a genius, I should say. The facility is still a supermarket. To this day, it is now the Whole Foods at Bienville and Broad. Another interesting story that comes out of the consolidated Vultee plant on the lakefront is Charles Carroll Lloyd, who goes to work for Consolidated as part of the war effort in 1941. When Consolidated decides to open up in New Orleans, he accepts transfer to New Orleans to become a supervisor at the lakefront plant. He meets a local girl named Mary Pfister, who he meets her in meets and marries her in 1950. After the war, he returns to San Diego, but he's an aeronautical engineer. He actually becomes a rocket scientist. And so he comes back, and in California in the late 50s, when satellite program is developing, JPL is the big mover and shaker there in the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and then the origins of NASA. And Carroll becomes one of those first NASA scientists. And this is a picture of him with his brother and sister. And basically, all of that rocket science stuff starts with him doing aeronautical work for Consolidated Vultee here in New Orleans. His daughter writes a book, Mary Grace Lloyd, née Carroll, uh, uh, writes a book that is a combination of a biography of her father, background on her father. It's actually her autobiography because she becomes a rocket scientist as well. And so this becomes the book that talks about her growing up with her father and then her career in rocket science. So this is the last PBY constructed at Consolidated Vultee, Franklin Avenue at the lakefront. The last plane was built in, you can see it there, September 27th, 1945. The war is over at this point, but the plane had been built out, pushed out into the lake, and the Navy, well, the Navy had yet to cancel the contract, so they naturally accepted it. I think they all pretty much knew at that point that, well, obviously assembly and construction stopped. Pretty much knew at that point that this was going to be it. So, of course, they all posed for a picture, kind of a victory lap, if you will, for the war effort in terms of the Catalina's contributions. Moving over now, we're on the western side of Franklin Avenue. We cross the street and we now get to what everyone knows as the UNO Lakefront Arena and the University of New Orleans East Campus. It was a couple of things before that. Of course, this is part of the land reclamation and building out the seawall. You can see we've got basically we've got that land is all in place. And at this point, so you can see this is 1943. We see we see basically it's undeveloped land, but it becomes what's listed there as a cantonment area. And then you've got that kind of ovally road. You got Lakeshore Drive turning into an oval. It's the buildings aren't listed there, but that becomes that oval area becomes the barracks, office, and support buildings for an Army Air Squadron that is the 122nd Observation Squadron. So the base and the base facilities were on the western side of the industrial canal. So you can see Lakeshore Drive ending there, and the Lakeshore Drive and the seawall, and just out of frame on the map there would be the mouth of the industrial canal. Cross the industrial canal, and you get Shushan Airport, and that became the airfield that not only was used to support the 122nd, but a lot of other Army air operations. Now remember, the Navy had their own thing going there on the. You can see the NAS New Orleans there, right to the left hand side, just to the left hand side of the beach on the map. So Shushan Airport starts as a commercial airport. It's pretty much co-opted for the war effort by the Army Air Corps. It is just the three-letter airport designation for it becomes NEW because it becomes New Orleans Lakefront Airport. We got stories about we'll tell stories about Shushan Airport and Abe Shushan as part of this series. But yeah, basically, it's our first commercial airport. It's NEW. That's why Louis Armstrong New Orleans International Airport is MSY, Moisant Stockyards, because the FAA and all of the regulatory people are just not keen on changing things. So to this day, Lakefront Airport is three-letter code NEW. The base expands out into that cantonment area. The Army pretty much absorbs the whole thing. And in addition to what is Bomber Base, which is the 122nd space in that area, that cantonment area now becomes an Army supply base. And that becomes Camp Leroy Johnson. So it's Camp Leroy Johnson. Leroy Johnson was a Medal of Honor winner, and so the base was named in his honor. Uh, it continues on as an Army property that is basically not doing anything throughout, from the end of the war. You get a certain amount of Cold War supply activity in the beginning of the 50s, but by the end of the 50s, it's pretty much just an empty area. I can remember my daddy going out there. I remember one of the first times my daddy went out there. Um, this is again Chancellor Hitz doing. You see the bullet there in 1964. The base formally closes. The land reverts to the state. The state gives it to LSUNO, which is now 7 years old, and potential for expansion, everything else. My daddy is working in his electronics shop in one of those barracks, actually by 64. That might be the new science building at that point. My daddy's working in his shop, though, and he gets a phone call from the chancellor. Ed, can you come see me? There's not a lot of people out there, so that the chancellor of the university, yeah, everybody knew Ed Branley back in the day, right? So he goes over to the chancellor, and Dr. Hitt says, Ed, we have just inherited an Army base. You were in the Air Force. I want you to go drive over there and give me just your reactions. And I remember going over there. I was with my daddy. He says, "Come on, let's go for a ride." Right. So we go over and we literally went through the old Army gate for checkpoint, the guard shack at the beginning, at right there on Franklin Avenue. It's actually it's one of the entrances now for the parking for the arena, but that shack's long gone. It said Camp Leroy Johnson at the top. And Daddy, we drove around out there and looked around, and then of course he went back and reported to Chancellor Hitt. Says, Dr. Hitt, we're looking good here. We got some interesting space, and of course by the 19 but one of our big projects for years was to get our own gym, our own arena. We used to say in the proposal time it was the Assembly Center, and then it becomes Lakefront Arena. So again, it starts as Bomber Base, and you can see there we see the cantonment area becomes that stockade and building out Camp Leroy Johnson. And then you can see Bomber Base, you can see the facilities along the lakefront, along Lakeshore Drive with that back area for the 122nd Observation Squadron. As we know, that all of that stuff there in the front gets demolished. A couple of Gulf South Research Institute builds out in the late 60s after that's all demolished and plowed over. And then, of course, the university starts planning potential expansion that results in Lakefront Arena. There's that little oval that we saw on the map, and you can see the Bomber Base facilities there. That all later becomes the Naval Reserve facility and Army Reserve facility out there. The government owned it, so that if you were in the Navy Reserve, Marine Corps Reserve, or the Army Reserve, you did your 1 weekend a month and started or potentially your 2 weeks in the summer as a reservist. You for sure you did your 1 weekend a month unless you had a specific assignment elsewhere out here at those facilities. The 122nd Observation Squadron was where the Army cantonment was, and that becomes Bomber Base. The western side is the squadron base, as you saw. It used the airfield, which it used as its airfield Shushan Airport, which is now Lakefront Airport. The base becomes the back of Camp Leroy Johnson. In 64, the whole thing gets closed down. Over at the airport gets newer hangar facilities built out by the Army for the 122nd. Now, the 122nd actually predates World War II because it was a dive bomber and it was an observation squadron for coastal defense. There was concern that U-boats were coming into the Gulf. So basically, we needed a coastal defense squadron. Of course, that airstrip later becomes Shushan Airport, and here's a Delta DC-3, which is the civilian version of the C-47, coming in for a landing, and people observing the aircraft coming in post-war. The two sides of the base were connected over the Industrial Canal by the Southern Railway train bridge. This is a bascule bridge that was basically at this time, it pretty much stayed down more than up because this connected the back belt. This connected the New Orleans Terminal Company's Lakeview, Gentilly train tracks that led out of town. So this basically this is those railroad tracks crossing the bridge here, going out into New Orleans East, and eventually going over the 5 Mile Railroad Bridge up to Slidell. It was a drawbridge, of course, that you could then pull up when craft had to come through into the lake from the Industrial Canal. So, and it's still there to this day. The Norfolk Southern, well, actually, all the railroads use it, but it's still a Norfolk Southern property. And the Amtrak Crescent comes and goes across this bridge on a daily basis. Now we're up to the Industrial Canal, and this handsome young man is a Coast Guard guardsman who is standing watch at a Higgins Industries facility. Higgins didn't so much well, I guess it's fair to say they outgrew the city park facility. They needed more space, in particular because now they're making by 1943 they're making LCVPs and they're making PT boats. So Higgins acquires land and builds out another manufacturing facility for the landing craft and the PT boats out on the industrial canal. Very good place to do this, right? Because you could literally just push the boats, launch them into the canal, connect there with the lake, and do your testing right there over in the lake. Here's lunch break at the Higgins plant on the industrial canal. There's the Cloverland dairy trucks. You brought your lunch from home. You could get a fresh pint of milk from Cloverland Dairy, which was actually over on South Carrollton Avenue, later becomes the Seal Test plant. Now it's post office. Here's a commissioning ceremony for a group of PT boats there. You can see on the right-hand side with the crews all in their crackerjack dress whites and a big ceremony to launch and commission those boats and then bring them out to fight the war. So that's the lakefront going from West End back over to the Industrial Canal. There's a lot more to say on a bunch of this stuff, and we certainly will over time. In particular, we will do an entire pod on Andrew Jackson Higgins and everything that he did, as well as we'll continue this series on lakefront development. Greetings from NOLA. And again, this is greetingstour.com, at greetingstour on Instagram. Uh, these folks go around the country and paint giant murals that are homages to the old 1930s, 1940s Kirk-type greetings postcard series. Greetings from Brooklyn, greetings from Cincinnati, greetings from New Orleans. And these folks went around and painted all these murals. I just love their work and can't help but shout them out as often as possible. Thanks so much for this. Gosh, this is a bit longer than usual we do, but thanks so much for sticking with me here. Of course, I am the NOLA History Guy. There's the email and at NOLA History Guy on all social media. Thanks again.